Hi, I'm Lynn Cornell, and welcome to Journey Through the Bible Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study through each book of the Bible, verse by verse and chapter by chapter. Keep in mind that I'm reading from the Holman Christian Bible, so if you're using a different Bible translation, the read would be different, but the message would be the same. We're going to continue in our study through the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in chapter 20. Now, Jesus, in the last statement here, and this is actually a continuing on the discourse. I always remember that chapter headings in verses were not a part of the original writings. It was written in a narrative form. They were added later, the verses and chapter headings, and oftentimes they did horrible jobs in where they placed these verses, and especially chapter headings. And the reason why is because we oftentimes break up mentally from the verses and the chapter headings. So we have to kind of keep in mind that Jesus is this is the same scene from chapter 19, in which he had just told them a rich man came to Jesus and asked him what good thing he must do in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. And then Jesus told him to go sell all he had and follow him. And the man walked away. The disciples, when Jesus, as the man was walking away, Jesus said, "How hardly shall a rich man enter the kingdom of heaven?" And so the disciples were astounded by that. Said, "Well, who then can be saved?" So Jesus, in answering them, he says that those of you who have followed me, that you have left all, you have sacrificed your life, that in the Messianic age, this is what you're going to reap. Your rewards will be, you're going to sit on 12 tribes, 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. But then he makes this statement, many who are first will be last, or many of you last will be first. And this is where this verse 1 picks up. It's the same thought. Verse 1, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the workers on a denarius for the day, he sent them into his field." Now this is a parable illustrating, again, to Peter them, the first, the meaning of those who were first would be last, and those who were last would be first. Verse 3, "And he went out about 9 in the morning and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. To those men he said, 'You also go to my vineyard, and I'll give you whatever is right.' So off they went. At about noon, and at 3, he went out again and did the same thing. Then about 5, he went out and found others standing around and said to them, 'Why have you been standing here all day, doing nothing?' 'Because no one hired us,' they said to him. 'You also go in my vineyard,' he told them. And when the evening came, the owners of the vineyard told his foreman, 'Call the workers and give them their pay, starting with the last and ending with the first.'" Now it's kind of interesting. There was a 12-hour workday, so keep that in mind. And so these guys were hired when he says 5 o'clock. So they only worked 1 hour, and they got a denarius pay, or a day's pay. Verse 9, "When those who were hired about 5 came, they each received denarius. So when the first ones came, they assumed they would get more, but they also received the denarius each. And when they received it, they began to complain to the landowner. 'These last men put in 1 hour, and you made them equal to us, who bore the burden of the day in the burning heat.' He replied to them, 'Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Didn't you agree with me for denarius? Take what is yours and go. I want to give this last man the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my business? Are you jealous because I'm generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Okay. Now this is a very interesting parable, because it does show the human frailty or jealousy or greed or covetousness that they thought, but they forgot and understand there was nothing wrong that was done here. In other words, if you agree with someone, and by the way, a denarius was a fair day's wages on top of that. In other words, they thought it was okay for a 12-hour day. Great. This was a great day's pay. It was fair. It was right. Their whole thing was that they thought that they was owed more when they saw the person who came, who the man said, okay, I'll give you a day's pay for 4 hours work. And then, of course, for 1 hour's work. There was nothing wrong for that man to do what he wanted to do with his field. Now, I think there's some other spiritual application here that I can make just from the principle of that God can do what he wants with his. And that is the key, by the way, with his. Okay? All right. Verse 17. While going up to Jerusalem, Jesus took the 12 disciples aside privately and said to them on the way, listen, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. They will hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked, flogged, crucified, and he will be resurrected on the third day. Now, very interesting that Jesus mentions the scribes and the Gentiles, who were both guilty of not condemning, convicting, crucifying Jesus. Verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons approached him with her sons, and she knelt down and asked him for something. What do you want? He asked her. Promise me, she said to him, that these 2 sons of mine may sit on your right hand and the other on your left hand in your kingdom. But Jesus answered, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? Well, you're able, they said to him. I don't think they understood exactly what Jesus was saying. But verse 23, he told them, you will indeed drink my cup, but to sit at my right and my left is not mine to give. Instead, it belongs to those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. Now, notice that there are positions that have been prepared. Now, verse 24, when the 10 disciples heard it, they became indignant with the 2 brothers. Now, what is interesting about this is that here you have, and this is one of the first times we see this, that James and John, that their mother comes to Jesus and basically tries to get the jump. Now, remember, we dealt with this question that they asked Jesus back in the 18th chapter, that they asked Jesus who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Now, I told you we're going to constantly see this. This is on their mind. And even though, yes, they're committed to God, they love him, but they're still thinking, I want, in terms of these positions of power, these positions of greatness. And so here is, and they're thinking of the kingdom age, that here's the mother now who wants to secure positions of her son for their sons. Now, the other 10 that were angry at this, but I think they were angry because she tried to get the jump on them. Okay? Because they are thinking about it as well. Verse 25, but Jesus called them over and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles dominate them, and the men of the high position exercise power over them. It must not be like that among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. And just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Now, this is very interesting because I think when we look at the church today, the organized church that is, how this is exactly the opposite that Jesus is saying right here. In other words, notice he says, and he mentions the Gentile rulers. So you have a hierarchy in which each hierarchy becomes power, authority, privilege. So there's a pride to that. And again, you saw that with the Pharisees. This authority, this power, this privilege. And again, so the disciples are thinking that. Now, think about this. You don't see this in church. We see this in church. Why do you think that there are certain denominations, that there are certain, pretty much all denominations, I would say this. I cannot think of one denomination that do not have this. That when you look at their authority structure, whether it's popes, bishops, archbishops, district bishops, right? Think of how they present themselves. Think of the clothing they wear. See? Think of the pomp that sometimes they surround themselves, they enter in. The pulpits, right? That, you know, in some cases you see these gold leaf thrones. You know, you see on the pulpit, you would see the pastor has a high back, the higher back, and the associate pastors. I mean, you see this all of this pomp. Think about this. And notice what Jesus says right here. It should not be that way. If you want to be great, he said, you should be a servant. Not seeking with your ambition to be great in authority. See? And that's, it is corruptive. I should say it is corrupting. It corrupts your spirit, you know, to kind of get in that flow. You know, and by the way, let's not get involved with the, mention the titles, right? These grandiose titles, you know. These days, you know, it's not, you have people who call themselves prophets, right? But that's not enough. And by the way, it used to be pastors and evangelists, but now it's apostle and prophets, okay? But that's not enough now. So now you got to be chief apostle, you know, master prophet. But of course, the Catholics have you beat His Holiness, His Eminence, you know, all of these grandiose names. And Jesus says it should not be that way. We should be serving one another. So if you want to be great, then you serve. So one of the telltale signs, you know that you see what's bad. When you see all this grandiose stuff in these denominations. And by the way, every single one of them have it. Every single one. All right, verse 29. As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed them, and there were two blind men sitting on the road. And when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." And the crowd told them, "Keep quiet." But they cried out all the more, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." Now remember the Canaanite woman who tried to use this and Jesus ignored her? Notice Jesus' reaction. Verse 32. Jesus stopped and called them and said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" Kind of interesting Jesus would do that, right? Because isn't it obvious, Jesus? I'm blind. You're the healer, right? Verse 33. "Lord," they said to him, "open our eyes." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they could see, and they followed him. I kind of like these stories right here. And one other thing, by the way, remember, we just read this, is that, remember that Jesus, I told you that when they brought children to Jesus, and you had people who thought they knew how Jesus felt, that they thought Jesus didn't want to be bothered, and they could not have been more wrong. And the same thing with here. Notice the crowd. Hey, be quiet, man. Don't, you know. But think about this, though. What if they had listened to the crowd? They would have missed their blessing. They cried out the more. Have mercy on us. All right, we're going to pick up with chapter 21 next time, so I'll see you then.